make me whole, something I cannot see, that make me whole.
Okay, so I see all of you thinking, what is this guy doing on the stage? He clearly has no idea about fashion. But I do know a thing or two about Chinese internet companies. And that's what I'm here to share with you today. Because I'm going to be talking to you about what they call in China the 4 little dragons that go overseas. So the 4 little dragons that go overseas. In China, they give a cute name to anything. So these are the 4 little dragons that go overseas. And those are the names that are given to 4 different companies: Alibaba, Shein, Pinduoduo, and ByteDance. Because Alibaba has been selling their products, or has been selling products of the merchants on their platform on many different platforms across the world. And probably the best one you know best is AliExpress. Then we also have Shein, which you will probably know, working in the fashion industry with their own Shein brand. We have Pinduoduo, which is the company behind Temu. And then in some countries in Europe, we already have TikTok Shop. Not yet in Belgium, but it's probably a matter of time. Now, I'm specifically going to share more insights from the work that I do for TechBus China about Shein and Temu. And I'm not here to promote these companies. As a matter of fact, I personally don't really like them. They're very interesting companies as an analyst, what I am, but I wouldn't shed a tear if they would disappear tomorrow. Having said that, like I said, they're very important in the business. So, especially since research recently showed that research in 37 countries recently showed that more than 40% of the people that were asked, where did you make your last purchase, were actually saying that was on a Chinese website, either Temu, AliExpress, Shein, and there's probably some in that 27 category as well. And what we'll also see is that the Amazon category, a large part of that is actually also Chinese merchants selling to Western consumers. So this raises the question, how did all of this happen? Especially in the last 5 years. A lot of these platforms have been coming up like mushrooms. So why did this happen? And to really understand that, I have to take you back in time a bit. From the current year of 2025, we're going back more than 10 years to the year 2014. Now, by that time, China had already become the factory of the world. A lot of different brands were making their products in Chinese factories for more than 10 years, which was actually beneficial for a lot of people involved. Now, on the one hand, the consumer, the Western consumer, could buy much more products with the same amount of money because the products could be presented cheaper when they were made in China. A lot of businesses made very good margins for a very long time because they had products manufactured in China. And in China as well, a lot of the people that moved from the inland provinces to the coastal areas, to the factories to work there, came from the countryside. Most of them were farmers before they started working in these factories. And by this symbiosis, also 700 to 800 million people in China were lifted out of poverty. So for a very long time, this was something that was beneficial for a lot of parties involved. But then something changed about 10, 15 years ago. Because China also developed, the wages went up, and China is no longer the cheapest place in the world to manufacture. As you can see here, the costs per hour for labor, for a manufacturing laborer, factory worker, are about $8 already. So a lot of brands that were manufacturing in China decided that China was getting too expensive. Now, iPhone is not able to do that because they need a lot of volume of hands and they need the skills to put together these iPhones. But especially also in the apparel and in the fashion industry, a lot of brands moved their manufacturing to Vietnam and to Bangladesh, the bigger brands. Now, this created a problem in China because a lot of these factories had overcapacity because their customers moved out to other countries. Now, and if you know the Chinese people a bit, you know they're not going to lie down and close these factories and go back to the countryside. No, they're going to find something, try to find something to solve this problem. And the first thing they did is what happened in 2014. That's why I'm taking you back to 2014. A lot of these factories that were previously producing goods for these Western brands, they actually thought, you know what? We have learned how to make high-quality products. We'll try and make our own products and sell them to the Chinese domestic consumer. So OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, became original design and original brand manufacturers. Now, you would have a platform like this that was started, BO, that they started in 2014, and that manufacturer would go on this website and they would show on the product page that they are a FILA manufacturer, which creates certain trust for the Chinese consumer. Now, let's see if I have no clue about fashion, but do you guys have any idea about fashion? Who, hands up, who thinks that these are beautiful shoes? No, oh, I don't see any hands, so if there are some people, they are a minority, and you're all wrong. You're all wrong, because it even says so on the shoe itself. They're beautiful. So you can leave it up to the Chinese to come up with a silly brand name. But this was a very important trend that started happening. And in the meantime, in the US, there was a company that started noticing this. And a memo was sent in a company that you might know called Amazon. Somebody with Amazon started noticing this, and that was the senior vice president of the Amazon marketplace, and he said, well, these factories, they want to have a chance to sell to the consumers, also Western consumers, and because they can make good products now, because they've been doing that for us. So, and we are the vehicle, we are the marketplace that will help them do that, which was great for Amazon, because more sellers means more competition, means lower prices, and more customers buying on Amazon. So, at the moment, it's a substantial, a significant part of the Chinese, or the sales on Amazon. Now, Amazon has never been very open about how many people, how many sellers were on their platform. Last year, for the first time, they said it is significant. A significant part of sellers come from China. How much is significant? Well, it's about 50%. 50% of all top sellers on the Amazon platform are Chinese merchants. And about 75% of all products that are sold on Amazon are sold by Chinese merchants. Now, this is how the whole thing started. But let's take one step further. We go back to 2016. A new company was launched in China, and that company was called Pinduoduo. Pinduoduo means together more and more. Together more and more what? Well, together more savings and more fun. So I could talk the whole evening or the whole afternoon about Pinduoduo. I won't do that, but I'll give you the most important thing for this context. Because what Pinduoduo did is they figured out that the business model for retail and wholesale needed to change. So the traditional business model was that you have a brand, they manufacture something, and this is all in the Chinese domestic market. Then that goes to a wholesaler, to a retailer. It goes from a central warehouse to a regional warehouse to a store. And of course, every link in this chain needs to have their own margin. All of the logistical movements also need to make some money. So the brand also adds their own margin. So something that's manufactured for 1 renminbi is about 8 renminbi by the time it reaches the Chinese consumer. What Pinduoduo said is, we're going to turn this whole thing around. We're not going to have manufacturers push their merchandise through the value chain. What we're going to do is we are going to aggregate that demand with the consumers, meaning that we will create a lot of demand and we will basically sell that back to the factory as guaranteed sales. Now, how do they sell that? Simply, roughly by the same way that Amazon does that, by selling advertising to these manufacturers. Now, and the interesting thing is that this is why this model is called C2M, meaning consumer to manufacturer. So you create the demand with the consumer and you basically hand that to the manufacturer. So the manufacturer can produce what people want instead of trying to make people want what they produce. Another name for this is factory to consumer, because instead of pushing it through wholesale and retail, what they do is the manufacturer ships it directly to the consumer in China, the Chinese consumer. And the thing is, that's really, really cheap in China. It's really cheap to send something from one end of the country to the other end of the country. So this manufacturer only needs to pay some advertising commission to the platform. They need to pay a very low postal rate within China. And that same product is now only 2 renminbi when it reaches the consumer. To give you an idea, about 1/3 of all packages that are shipped within China are packages of goods sold on Pinduoduo. Now, this had an enormous impact. In 2013, Alibaba, you probably all know Alibaba because of AliExpress, but they are really big, the biggest e-commerce company in China. They had about 80% market share. Now, in 2025, this has shrunk to 35%. And a lot of that market share went to Pinduoduo because they were so successful with this. Also, some of it went to Douyin, and I'll tell you a bit later what Douyin is. So you might sit there and think, okay, that's an interesting story, but so what? We are not selling in China, so why is this important? Well, it's important because after a few years, Pinduoduo had reached the maximum number of consumers in China. So basically, they have about 800 million consumers now on their platform shopping for things. And that's about as high as you can get in China, because there's about 1 billion people online, and about 80% of them are actually shopping online. So there's not much growth anymore. And Pinduoduo actually had an IPO. They went public in 2018. So they have to show their shareholders that they continue to grow. So if you cannot grow inside China anymore, where do you grow? Well, maybe you should leave China. And that's what happened in 2022, when in the United States, in September 2022, a platform called Temu was launched. Now, very important to know about the launch of this product is how fast this went. So I'm not going to go through this full slide with you. At the end of the presentation, I'm going to show you a QR code. If you scan that with your phone, so have your phone ready in about 18 minutes, then I can send you the handouts afterwards. But important to know is that in January 2022, the management of Pinduoduo for the first time started discussing the possibility of going abroad. 9 months later, they launched that website in the United States. 5 months later, they were the youngest brand ever to advertise on the Super Bowl, during the Super Bowl in the US. And then 1 month later, they started rolling out to first the English-speaking countries, and then by now, I counted it this week, they are active in 95 different countries, among which also Belgium and the Netherlands, where I'm from. So when I placed my first order, I was curious, is this Temu platform really as cheap as they say? So if you realize that all of these different platforms, Amazon, Shein, Temu, Pinduoduo, most of this stuff all comes from the same factories. So if I look up this product that I bought, which is a cable organizer, it was about 15 euro on Amazon. You can get the same thing on Shein for 8 euro. I bought it on Temu for 5.38 euro. Now, if you think that's cheap, if you go in China and you go on the Pinduoduo platform and you buy it inside China, and then still that manufacturer has a small margin, I can buy this in China for slightly over 1 euro. So again, you go from 1 euro to 15 euro. Of course, it's very different because this is in China and this has to be shipped also to other countries, but that gives you an idea about what it costs to actually make this stuff. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you 2 innovations of those platforms. And the first one is the innovation that Temu did with what they call the managed models. They launched in 2022 what they call the fully managed model or the consignment model. So that basically means that they sell on behalf of the manufacturer. On the right, we have the Western consumer. In the middle, we have Temu on the left we have the manufacturer. Now remember that they already were doing business with almost all of the manufacturers that were making goods in China because they were selling on the Pinduoduo platform. They selected those manufacturers with goods that they thought could also be popular outside China. And then they said to these manufacturers, give me your best price quote because I'm going to send a lot of volume again, C2M, I'm going to send a lot of volume to you, so give me your best price. And if Temu agreed to that price, they would say to the manufacturer, okay, you can put it in our warehouses. Ship it to our warehouses in Guangdong, in the south of China, but we're not buying this stuff from you. You are still the owner of these goods. What they do, in the meantime, they decide the selling price. The manufacturer has no say in what price this is sold for, even though he still owns the goods. Why do they do that? Well, very simply because those manufacturers have no idea about how to sell to Western consumers. They have no English-speaking people, no German, French-speaking people. They don't know about consumer behavior, consumer needs. So it would be a lot of investment to actually get that kind of knowledge inside their factory. They can simply hand it over to Temu, and Temu will sell it for them. Temu does not only just decide on the price, they also do all of the marketing, the sales, the customer service. And the only thing that the manufacturer has to do is manufacture these goods and put them in the warehouse. Now, the Western consumer goes on the app, buys the product, and that product then gets shipped by, in this model, by airplane. It gets picked in a warehouse in the south of China, gets shipped by airplane, and then by local courier. For instance, in the Netherlands, it's DHL and PostNL that do that. Then, after a while, the manufacturer gets paid. But if these goods don't sell, Temu will tell the factory, you know, this stuff is not selling. So you can either come and pick it up at your costs, or you will pay inventory costs, or I'll put the whole thing through the shredder because we don't want it anymore. We want it out of our warehouse. So this is the tough game they play. Well, there's much more aspects to this than I can share today. And I will also, if you scan the QR code, send you more information about how the model works. But this is the essence. This is what they call the fully managed model. After a while, that fully managed model has one downside, that all of the logistical costs in orange are paid by Temu. And they found out that it's very, very difficult to get that profitable because of the logistical cost. Every package that they send out, they pay about 9 to 10 euros in logistical costs. They also give a lot of discounts to the customers because then they download the app and start buying. So what they did after a while, they added another model called the semi-managed model. And in that case, they simply say to the factory, we won't ship it for you. You ship it to a warehouse in Europe, for instance, in this case, a foreign warehouse, and you are responsible for the delivery. We will have some suppliers that we certify to do that with you. But this way, on the one hand, they decrease the cost for themselves, but also they made the delivery to the consumer much faster. And the thing about Temu is that they constantly, every time the market changes, every time, for instance, you get tariffs, they will try to put the goods already in a foreign warehouse. So, again, I won't go through all of these, but this is like the menu that Temu nowadays can offer to these different factories, to these different merchants. And they can pick the one that works best for them. And they change it every time that they are faced with a challenge or a new policy, for instance, in a country. Something else that you need to know is that this company, Pinduoduo, we at TechBuzz, we did some research into their HR policies, and we found that they are sort of run like a military operation. They are very lean and mean compared to other e-commerce companies. And if you work at Pinduoduo, somebody could come to your desk and say, you better pack your stuff because in 2 days you will be working on the other side of the country because we are opening a warehouse in Xinjiang. Or maybe in Eastern Europe, because they're launching Temu there. So they move the stuff as a front, as a platoon, to the places where they are needed most. So this is also something that you're up against. The second model I want to discuss with you is the Shein model. Now, you're probably more familiar with Shein, but I've noticed that not everybody exactly knows how their business model works. So they have their own designers, but they also work with these original design manufacturers. So, bless you. Their own designers and these ODMs, they design clothes, and Temu or Shein knows exactly what the cost will be for these. So they evaluate the proposal, and if they are okay with it, they ask for some samples from the manufacturer. Then, maybe after a couple of changes, when it's approved, they tell this factory, make 100 or 200 of this product for me. Not more than that, just a 100 or 200. And of course, the manufacturer makes no profit on such a low quantity. But the idea is that when they put the product on the website and they launch about 2,000 different designs every day, the consumer will tell them which are the popular products, because the website is basically one big A/B test. So the goods get delivered by the manufacturer, get shipped to people around the world within about 7 days. And when a product is popular, then they tell the manufacturer to make a second batch, a third batch, etc., etc. And that's also the moment where the manufacturer starts making money. The consumer gets this product within about 14 days after he ordered it, and a month earlier, the product didn't even exist because it wasn't designed yet. So what Temu or what Shein says is that because of those low order quantities, we don't really have low waste, but we can offer very low prices. And from one point of view, I sort of admire what they have made up here. It's just such a shame that they use such a smart model, such a smart business model, to send polyester all around the world in airplanes. So there is a lot of issues with what they do, but on the other hand, they are quite smart. But what they say is, because we have low waste, because we don't have stores, we are much cheaper than, for instance, a Zara or an H&M. That's basically the proposition that they have. Now, it's always good to compare, because as you saw with that cable organizer, it's mostly the same factories that make this stuff. It comes from the same factory. So this bikini set you can buy on Shein for less than 10 euro. Or you can go on Amazon if you prefer that and pay almost 60 euro for the same thing. Comes from a Chinese merchant as well. Now, Shein also opened their own flagship store on the Amazon platform, because they're a brand, so they also need to be in those channels. If you are a Shein fan, which probably is not a very high percentage here in the room today, but if you are, I wouldn't advise you to go and shop on Amazon, because that dress that Shein sells on Amazon for about 31 euro, you can also get that on their own platform for 11 euro. So sometimes we have to think, maybe not why is all of this stuff so cheap, but why is it so much more expensive elsewhere? And of course, there are very different business models. But if you look at Amazon, about more than 50% of what you pay on Amazon stays with Amazon in the US. Because the merchants need to pay for visibility, about 15% of the sales price. They need to pay commission, up to 15% for certain product categories. And if you want to sell to the American consumer that is a member of Prime, Amazon Prime, your product needs to be in an Amazon warehouse. So you need to pay for fulfillment by Amazon, 20 to 35%. Of course, it's a different business model, because you will get it within 1 day instead of maybe 10 days, but quite often it's the same product. So what we've seen happening in the last couple of years is that things used to be made in China. Walmart used to purchase all of the stuff they were selling on their website and in their stores in China. But then Amazon gave them the opportunity to sell it themselves. The manufacturers and traders and merchants could sell through the Amazon platform. And we're now in an era where we have the 4 little dragons that go overseas, and they can market it themselves. They don't really need Western brands, wholesalers, retailers anymore, because they have found a way to sell to the consumer. Now, of course, that makes us feel very uneasy, and there's a lot of course, criticism about Temu and Shein, a lot of which is true, some is I think, not correct. I won't have time to go into that today. But there's also an aspect, I think, that we should look into the mirror, and maybe what is reflecting back at us is not always so pretty. Because if you go back to the beginning of my story, who's been making those products in some of the same factories that now sell directly to the Western consumer? And who thinks that the labor conditions in those factories were so much better in the past, and now that Shein and Temu are selling that stuff, all of a sudden the labor conditions got so much worse? And who moved out their manufacturing to cheaper countries in the first place? Countries manufacturing that is now being filled with Temu and Shein. Of course, there's also a lot, including myself, of criticism about the polyester that is in these products. Now, I think that we also need to realize that if you look at this chart, yes, Shein is one of the cheapest brands. This is the price index, and this is the percentage of polyester. Yes, they're all the way on the top, but there's a lot of different brands as well that we might be a bit more critical about. And all of you people, well, maybe not you, but maybe your neighbors and your kids that buy on Shein and Temu. Who's buying all this shit, right? Nobody forces us, but a large part of the problem is also with us as consumers. Now, don't get me wrong, there is a serious problem with these platforms because there is no level playing field. They get a tax exemption still at this moment of €150. They declare VAT, but probably not the real value of the goods. They sometimes, some platforms that have higher orders above the €150, split it into different shipments to make it look like it's smaller orders. There's IP infringements, and there's a lot of safety concerns. So we do really, especially our government and our European government, we do need to do something about this. So I fully support the fact that they want to cancel that €150 tax exemption. So these platforms also pay, because if you import in bulk in a container, you need to arrange all of these things, so should they. But the problem is that we are a bit slow in Europe, because we, in 2014, in July, started talking about removing the import duty exemption by 2028. Now, as I've shown you, Temu is constantly changing its business model. And we are, basically, as Europe, we are like an old car, and we are being overtaken in this China speed race by a racing car. So we should all realize that, and we should move quicker. Also, you as, if your company is hurt by these platforms, you should also realize that the biggest danger is that we underestimate these companies. So they will take over the sales channels, and those sales channels will not be selling your products. They will be selling Chinese products. And what I showed you in the beginning, what happened in China, might as well happen here, with Pinduoduo being Temu, and this one, Douyin. Douyin is the Chinese version of TikTok. Same company, ByteDance behind that. So that means that when TikTok Shop comes to your market, there's another channel that might become. On the one hand, it's an opportunity for promoting your products, but there will also be Chinese products that are promoted there. Now, I've been asked to give you some advice as a fashion industry. I don't know about your industry. I would find it very arrogant to tell you what to do. I'm also an analyst. I'm not a consultant. So based on these things, you need to figure out in your own branch, in your own sector, what to do. But I can say this, and this is basically the same thing that I say to anybody that I present to. You're in a sort of a dragon boat race. Last week it was Dragon Boat Festival in China, and you are in one of those races. But the Chinese will always win on low price, agile operations, and on the supply chain that they have. But if you sort of have your service, the brand that you've been building, the innovation, because we, of course, invest much more in R&D than some of these Chinese factories, and the quality that is often much higher than those Chinese products, then you might have a chance. But do realize that these are things that are still USPs maybe for you, but the Chinese are getting better and better and better at that as well. So that might mean that if you are complacent and not fast enough and don't take action, then you might be out of that dragon boat race. I'm very sorry to leave you at this depressed note, but this is, hold on. But this is the reality. And I think that when you, today at Fashion Talk, listen to different people speak about different aspects, keep this in the back of your mind also, because all of it is linked to how you stay competitive in your own market. And I wish you a good dragon boat race. If you want to get more information and this presentation handout, you can scan this QR code. Thank you.